This is a GCSE History revision video for students at Torpoint Community College, and this one is the first in a series looking at crime and punishments. In this one we're looking at crime and punishments from the year 1000 to 1500, Anglo-Saxon, Norman and Middle Ages. If we look at the Anglo-Saxon period first of all, at that time England's population was around about 1.7 to 2 million people, 90% of them living in the countryside. Law was really made by a very powerful king and supported by the nobility, but village communities and family ties helped enforce the law at local levels too. Increasingly, the Christian church was having a big influence on ideas about crime and punishment. During the Anglo-Saxon period, there are three key trends in crime and punishment. Firstly, the power and influence of the king grew over crime and punishment. Secondly, the role of the Christian church increased. And thirdly, the use of punishments increased, particularly capital punishment, execution. If you look at the way that Anglo-Saxon kings worked, across Britain there was a three-tiered structure for society. You've got the nobles, you've got freemen, and you've got serfs. Serfs are kind of peasants, I suppose. All three of those classes are subject to the king's authority. And the king rules in very close connection with the nobility. Nobles play a big role in keeping the structure going by backing laws that protected their own interests. In return, the king gave them land as a way of saying thank you for their support. Now, any action which threatened that social structure and the way in which society was being run counted as a crime. These could range from a serf starting a fight with a noble to the worst crime of all they saw, treason. And these types of crime were known as crimes against authority. By around about the year 1000, English towns were growing in size and number. And in these larger communities, there were far more opportunities to commit both crimes against the person, talking about assault, murder, physical harm, and crimes against property, theft, robbery, arson. There's loads of people in close contact with each other, and it's much easier to get away with crime in a busy town where people don't know you that well, and you can sort of hide. It's much harder in a village where everybody knows everybody else. There's also far more valuable items to steal in a town than there are in a village. The church was very, very powerful, and you'll remember when we looked at the Elizabethan period how important the church was. It's perhaps even more important in this Anglo-Saxon period. And it has particular responsibility for stopping what they call moral crimes. Actions that don't physically harm people or property, but do not match up with what they consider to be the decent behaviour. During the Anglo-Saxon period, Anglo-Saxon kings had formally introduced for the first time codes of law. With each new code, new laws could be introduced and existing laws could be altered. In 1066, we have the Norman invasion. William the Conqueror and the Normans come over, defeats Harold at the Battle of Hastings, and become a conquering army, taking over England. And William used the law as a way to establish control and power over the society. The Anglo-Saxon population were rebellious, were quite hostile to the Normans, so these new laws were a way in which they could establish themselves quite firmly. The Normans introduced a new law called the Mordrum Law. If a Norman was murdered by an Anglo-Saxon and the murderer escaped, they weren't captured, they weren't executed, they weren't punished, then the local hundred, the community that murderer came from, had to pay a fine. And that fine was known as the Mordrum fine. And this was designed to make the local people responsible for each other and also to sort of stop an increase in revenge and murders and sort of plots against the local Normans. It also shows some level of continuity with the Anglo-Saxon system of sharing responsibility for the behaviour of everybody in the community. A big set of new laws that the Normans introduced were the forest laws. William I declared huge stretches of the English countryside to be royal forests, which he could use for hunting, and only he could use for hunting. In Hampshire, he took control of what he called the Nova Foresta. We call it the New Forest. Around 40 separate village communities were evicted from that area in order to clear this playground for William to hunt on whenever he wanted to do. Now, the forest laws meant that what had previously been common land, where peasants had the right to graze animals, to take firewood, or catch a few rabbits, was now strictly controlled by the king and his forces. Only those who could afford to pay for hunting rights would now be allowed to hunt there, so really Normans and nobility. For peasants, it became illegal to carry hunting weapons or even pick up a fallen branch, and hunting wild animals for food was now treated as a crime called poaching. Anyone who was caught faced very severe punishments. These punishments included blinding, it included castration. So I suppose they're assuming that it's men that are doing the poaching, I suppose. Now, this leads to huge bitterness, these forest laws, because they take away people's access to natural resources and took away what they saw as their fundamental human rights, their freedoms. Ordinary people saw these laws as unjust and unfair and didn't really frown or punish themselves anyone who broke them. They kind of almost encouraged them. The forest laws created what became known as social crimes, things that are technically against the law, but which most people in society don't approve of, or don't disapprove of. During the Anglo-Saxon period, any man over the age of 14 who tried to avoid trial and punishment by running away from his community was declared an outlaw. Women who ran away were said to be called waived. And outlaws and waived women lost the protection of the law. They could be killed by anybody without any consequence. And lots of them took refuge in forests where they lived rough and lived a life of crime, I suppose. The most famous becoming Robin Hood, who probably didn't exist, but is a sort of a sign of people looking on outlaws, people who are living by poaching, as kind of heroic in some way. We also look at the later Middle Ages, the period from 1150 to 1500, and there's some key events here. In 1154, Henry II became king, and he introduced some quite important reforms to crime and punishment. He reorganised the courts and set up the first real prisons for the people who were accused and waiting for trial, and those were known as the Assize of Clarendon. He also ordered royal judges, known as Justices of the Eyrie, to visit each county twice a year to hear the most serious criminal cases. Parliament also created new crimes through new laws for crimes. And when you talk about Parliament, this isn't the type of Parliament that we're used to seeing on television and in the 21st century. This is a Parliament which is just a group of important individuals, the most important noblemen in the country. They only meet whenever the king tells them to. He calls them in when he needs a particular law passed. Once they've done what he asks them to do, he sends them away again. They're not elected, they're not voted for, there's no democracy here. In the 13th century, Parliament created two new crimes with new laws. The first one was called Statutes of Labourers, and the second was to do with heresy. The Statutes of Labourers is really a consequence of the Black Death. The Black Death was an outbreak of bubonic plague, which was hugely crippling to England. It killed a third of the population. Now, the population of England was around about 6 million, so 2 million people being killed. In today's society, you'd be looking at 20 million people being killed. What that left is far fewer workers. Those workers who did survive are now in greater demand, they're scarcer, so they're able to demand much higher wages. The ruling classes and the nobility were really worried by those higher wages and worried about peasants becoming wealthier. And they didn't want to pay the higher wages. And the Statute of Labourers, which was passed in 1351, introduces a maximum wage. We're used to talking about a minimum wage. This is a maximum wage for workers and made it a crime to ask for more. It was also a crime to move to another area of the country and look for better paid work. The other laws that are introduced by Parliament are laws to do with heresy, and it shows the power of the Christian Church. What you're starting to see in the 13th and 14th century is people questioning some of the practices and beliefs of the Christian Church and wanting some reforms in the church. And the clergy felt very undermined and threatened by that, and medieval kings were very keen to support the church. So laws against heresy were introduced in 1382, in 1401 and 1414. And people who committed heresy were known as heretics. Punishments for heresy were extremely severe. The 1401 law introduced burning at the stake, a particularly painful and brutal way of executing somebody, because whilst they're being burnt, it can take several minutes for them to actually lose consciousness. During that time, they're getting through incredible pain. We just go over to the board. I've got a summary on the board of some of the things that we've just been talking through. So let's make sure we can see this. Where we go? There we go. I'll go over here, and then you can see it better. So we've got a timeline at the top, showing the time period. We've got how in the Anglo-Saxon period things are improving. We've got these influence of the king increased, the influence of the Christian church increased, and increased punishments. We've got new crimes, so we've got crimes against authority, crimes against the person, crimes against property, we have moral crimes, heresy, social crimes, and over here the new laws that are being introduced, so mordrum, forest laws, the statutes of labourers, and heresy. You'll need to watch this video in conjunction with the second one, which will look at law enforcement and punishment during this time period. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this useful.